Just a moment to let everybody in from the waiting rooms and get all the IT up and running. We'll start shortly. All right, welcome and thank you for joining the Boston University Institute for Global Sustainability for today's Research for People and the Planet webinar on investigating consumer interest in circular take-back programs. My name is Susan Friedholm-Murphy, and I am the Executive Director of the Impact Measurement and Allocation Program, or IMAP, here at BU. This sits between the IGS and the Questrom School of Business. The IMAP supports research projects focused on measuring environmental and social impacts of corporations to specifically help the finance industry make more informed decisions. But today I come to you in my affiliation with the IGS, and as someone who studied e-waste take-back programs for my own graduate research nearly 20 years ago, I'm really interested to hear the latest on the topic from Professor Remy Trudel today. We encourage all of you to please visit the IGS website at www.bu.edu/IGS, where you'll find Boston University research spanning planetary and environmental health, climate and governance, and sustainability transitions, and energy systems of the future, all with the goal of advancing a sustainable and equitable future. A few quick housekeeping notes. The recording for today's webinar will be available on the IGS website and emailed to everyone who registered. To ask questions, please use the Q&A button at any point, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can following the presentation. I'd now like to introduce our featured speaker, Remy Trudel, to discuss his recent study in the Journal of Marketing. Remy is part of the IGS core faculty and is an associate professor of marketing at BU's Questrom School of Business. His research on consumer well-being focuses on sustainability, health and diet, and personal finance. Remy's research has been published in top academic journals and covered in media outlets around the world. Without further ado, over to you, Remy.
Yeah, hi, thank you for having me. I'll just share my screen quickly here. Maybe not so quickly. There it is. Okay, thank you. I know we don't have much time here, so I will get going. So today we're going to be talking about circular economy, and in particular circular take-back programs, and whether or not consumers value them and their perceptions of them. This is research that I did with a former student of mine, Anna Tari, who is now working in Spain. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I believe everyone on this call is familiar with circular take-back programs. And so essentially what circular take-back programs are is kind of an agreement between the firm and consumers that when consumers no longer want their product, that they bring it back to the firm. And the firm then takes their product and uses it as material input into future products, or recycles it, or refurbishes it, or reuses it, resells it, so forth. So there's lots of companies that have got these programs. There's definitely more in Europe, but they're gaining steam here in the US as well. And so in this research, we ask the simple question, which is like, do consumers value these programs? And so intuitively, you could see this going either way. And so when we first started this, we weren't sure which way this was going to go. Because if you think about it, it's, circular programs are certainly a shift in thinking for firms, but they're also a shift in thinking for consumers, because consumers, if you ask consumers at point of purchase to think about disposal, to think about waste, that could have some negative effects. And so we weren't actually sure what direction this was going to go in. And so that was where we started for this. We do find that it does increase valuation for these products, and this is why we believe so. And so we ground our effect and our research in the psychological ownership literature. And so psychological ownership is essentially the feeling of attachment that we have with products. The research has found that there are essentially three paths to psychological ownership. The first is control. So if a product affords you control, it increases the capacity for that product to to garner these feelings of emotional attachment. The second is through intimate knowledge. If products allow you to gain knowledge and become intimate with them, again, psychological ownership increases. And the third path is through self-investment and identity links. So again, so for products that allow you to invest in them and allow you to make connections to them, especially with your identity and identities that are important to you, that increases psychological ownership. And in the end, psychological ownership increases consumer valuation and willingness to pay. And so there's a long stream of literature in marketing and consumer psychology on this. There's also work in design engineering on product affordances and psychological ownership that supports this pathway from psychological ownership to valuation. And so we feel that circular take-back programs increase disposal control and control over a product, right? By increasing the options for disposal and control over disposal and control over waste in that process. And that increases the capacity for psychological ownership. And so these products then have the ability to garner greater psychological ownership, and that's what increases willingness to pay. And this is kind of what we test throughout our research here, is this conceptual model. So I'm going to share with you 3 quick studies. In this work, we've actually run 35 studies on this. There are like 34 experiments or 33 experiments, a couple field studies, and here's some observational data that we got with a partner. So the first one I'll talk about is this field data. And so we were able to get some data from a reverse logistics company with a smartphone app. And so this company gave us data for one of the European partners. It's a sports and apparel company with its own retail stores. You guys are all familiar with the brand. I have an NDA, so I can't really tell you who the brand is, but I'm sure many of you are wearing them on your feet right now. But anyways, data collection for this period was about 4.5 years, starting in 2016 and ending in 2020. We have about 5,200 observations or visits to the store and basket transactions, and we have 24 consumers making those visits. Consumers have between 1 and 16 visits. All the observations in this data are from consumers who participated in the program. So we have, like, again, the data came from the reverse logistics company. So we only have data from those people who participated. And so we'll talk about that. So we acknowledge the selection issue there. And so I'll talk about that a little bit here. So how it works at this location. And so participants like walk into this store. And so again, sports and apparel. So imagine that you're buying running shoes. So you go in, you buy your running shoes, you get to the till, and while you're paying for the till, they slip a flyer or a leaflet into your bag. And on that leaflet is a description of the circular take back program and a link to download the app. And so consumers then go home, they download the app, and then they scan the product information on the box or on the label, and everything uploads into the app. And then when consumers no longer want the product, they just click take it back. And then the reverse logistics company comes and gets the products and brings them back to the retailer. So like I said, we only observe people who participated in this program. Ideally, we'd have a control group where we'd have people who also shopped at this retailer, and we'd watch their shopping over time as well, but we don't have that. But what we do have is we have about 840 consumers who signed up for the app, uploaded their initial purchases, and then didn't participate anymore. And so we're going to treat them as a control group. And again, like, remember that these people are basically uninformed in their first visit. That's when they get the leaflet and information about the product. And then they go home and do this. We also have a secondary analysis of behavior over time for those who did participate. So quickly, we use a linear mixed effect model with random effects for participants because they're buying more than once over time. And we do 2 analyses. We do an analysis over time, and then we do participate versus the control I just described. here are some descriptives. Again, this was in Europe, it's in Germany actually. And so that's what they're spending. And this is here's the data. So this is participation over time. So this is consumers who participated over time, had more than a single visit, and these are basket amounts here. And what we find is that consumers are willing to pay and spend more in the store in their second visit than they do in their initial visit. They spend more in their third visit than they do in their second before it levels off on the fourth visit. But important here is that they stay at that level after the fourth visit. They're still spending more than their initial visit, and that continues on over time. And so what this shows is that over time, at least for those people who do participate in this product, they seem to value this product or not this product, this program, and they tend to spend more on subsequent visits when they arrive. When we look at a comparison between those 840 and everyone in this group and the average of this group, we find that again, there's an increase in the people who participate versus those people in that control group. So this gives us some correlational evidence, albeit we're a little bit cautious because there are some selection issues and some other issues with this data that don't allow us to, be 100% confident. But like I said, we have 35 studies and there's 9 in the paper. And so I think we're able to triangulate and be pretty confident in the end result here. So I'll share with you a couple experiments that we ran just to give you a taste for what we did. In study 2 here, we basically got people to make a choice between products. We chose white t-shirts because they're commodity products and basically the same. I'll show you the conditions in a second. But we had 300 online participants participate in this study. We had, in the conditions, we had participants make a choice between 2 t-shirts that were the same price. We had another condition where one t-shirt was higher priced than the other. And in the final condition, that higher priced t-shirt was part of a circular program. And so these are the instructions we told them. So we asked them to choose between 2 similar products. We told them that we'd give them a budget of $20 to purchase for these products, and that we would randomly select a winner. And if selected, that they would receive the product of choice less the price of the product chosen. So we made this incentive compatible so that it was actually a consequential decision, and that they would be spending their own money if they were selected. Sorry, this is what we showed them. So in the no information condition, they had to choose between an H&M t-shirt and a Zara t-shirt, both white t-shirts, both priced the same. We pre-tested these t-shirts to be equally liked and equal on quality and perceptions and likelihood to buy. In the second condition, we manipulated price, and now the Zara t-shirt was $1.75 more. So we increased the price of the Zara t-shirt. And in the final condition, we had them to choose between an H&M t-shirt, and this time the Zara t-shirt was still $1.75 more, but it was part of a circular program. And this is what we found. So in the initial 2 conditions, so when choosing between the Zara and the H&M t-shirts that were the same price, we found that people preferred the H&M t-shirt. When we increased the price of the Zara t-shirt, as expected, H&M shares went up because we have these commodity products, and now the consequential decision, they don't want to spend another $1.75 on this for a white t-shirt. But when we framed it as part of a circular program, we found now that people were more willing to pay had a higher willingness to pay for the Zara product than they did the H&M product. And so we find that that's marginally significant in that condition, but the 56% is statistically significant over the 18% and the 41%, which are the contrasts of interest. Okay. In the final study I'm going to share with you, I just wanted to share the complete model. And so what we did here, again, we recruited 300 online participants for this study. We had 2 conditions. We have a circular and a control condition. I'll show you the materials. Again, we used materials that were actually used by IKEA at the time. And so I'll show you those. And then we measured disposal control using these 3 items and psychological ownership using these 3 items. So we told people that they would be going on a shopping trip for a sofa, and then we presented them with these 2 conditions. And so in the no information, the control condition, they had no information. They just had the ad about the sofa. We removed price from these because that's what we wanted, was willingness to pay. And then in the circular program, this is their actual promotion at that time. And then we asked people to their willingness to pay on a scale from $0 to $500. And then we asked them the 6 items that I showed you before. And what we found was essentially this, is that people were willing to pay more for the circular product. And that was, this was all serially mediated through disposal control and psychological ownership. And so the reason people were willing to pay more for the circular product was because of increased disposal control of circular products. And that led to increased psychological ownership, which increased the willingness to pay. So to wrap up, what we found, and hopefully I was clear in presenting this, is that consumers do appear to value circular economy products, and that they're also willing to pay more for these products. We also measured loyalty in our research and found increases in loyalty as well, although it was not through the same pathway. It wasn't through psychological ownership, but we measured that as well. And then I guess if there's one sentence that would kind of capture all the research that we've done in this area, is that, circular take-back programs kind of afford more disposal control to consumers, which increases the capacity for circular take-back programs to garner psychological ownership. And that's the pathway, and that's the explanation. So thank you. That's all I have. If you've got questions, put them in the box, and I'm happy to answer them. Should I stop the share, or should I keep these up in case someone wants to see something?
So why don't you keep them in case there are relevant questions? We have a first question for you. The question is, did the shopping experience simulate online shopping? So, for example, were any aspects of the shopping experience, like the marketing and brand recognition, layout of online or physical store space, considered or controlled for?
Yeah, we have several studies that the studies that we have that I showed you today aren't like that, but we have several studies that followed the online ads and used actual materials, actual circular programs from online websites from these companies. We're typically had to manipulate. So we would choose an online product from someone with a circular program and then edit out the circular information in their ads, and that's what we would do. But yes, we did use some online stimuli as well.
Excellent. So anyone in the audience, I just want as a reminder, that you can use the Q&A space to type in your questions, and I will read them aloud for you. Next question I have for you, Remy, is about the size of that preference that you found consumers have for the take-back programs. Do you have any sense of how the size of the additional money consumers are willing to pay relates to the cost to the company of, do they see an additional cost to running this program? And do you have a sense of if those are, which one's larger than the other?
Yeah, I don't have cost information. In all our studies, our average willingness to pay, our average effect size, if we're talking in terms of that as a percentage of willingness to pay, is just under 7%. And I don't know about increases in costs. Our highest is around 9.3%, and our lowest is at 4%, but the average is around 7%. And so I do think that there are additional costs. In some of our studies, we have firms using reverse logistics, actually coming and grabbing products from you and retrieving them. And obviously that has a cost. And I also think that there's probably an increase in valuation there for convenience for customers. But the difference in convenience and willing to pay for that convenience is usually like not significant. Like we don't find a strong effect of that, but there is obviously a convenience aspect to that in real life that I think in experiments where we're not actually, dealing with real money, that might be undervalued. So yeah. But yeah, I don't have the cost information, so I don't know if it's a net break even or not.
That's all right. Our next question asks could your assumptions be made about the willingness to pay for the circular option in other fields? So outside of consumable goods or to other consumable goods rather, outside of the original study, for example, electronics, would you expect to see the same trends?
Yeah, we have a study where we actually measured. We have a couple studies for electronics. We measured laptops and we also measured like headsets, like big like earphone headsets, and we find consistent results there. I think for laptops, it's our effect was smallest in all of our studies for laptops. I'm not quite sure why, but I think that might have to do with people's perceptions of kind of I think people's perceptions of ulterior motives of those firms in circular, but I don't have evidence of that, but that's kind of my impression was that um that people have I think like when you think about ulterior motives or greenwashing effects, I think that those are strongest for tech products, unfortunately, typically. And so I think that might have influenced the size of that effect.
Yeah. Did you observe any difference in age in those who chose the take back option or circular option compared to the non?
Yeah, so don't get differences in age per se, and I think um, that could just be a sample size. We're close, like that's a power issue, I think. So in most of our studies, we were basically at 100 per cell. We also don't see any main effects of people with green values. So I always, in all this, I'm always like careful to not only, do research that is looking at people who've got sustainable goals, because I think I think I think in the bigger picture of any of these programs, like for any of these programs to work, they have to appeal to more generally to a broader audience. So I'm always careful of that. So we don't see differences in green values on this. We don't see differences in age. There's a little bit of a gender difference in some products, but it's not consistent. Sometimes women are more likely to pay are willing to pay more than men in some of these studies, but we don't see it consistently.
All right. We also have a question about, do you think participation might increase if the take back program for apparel or shoes had the QR code on the item's tag rather than something that they had to sign up for at the beginning of life of the product?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different questions to be had as far as like increasing like take up of these programs. I know a lot of firms are offering incentives to do so. Like they'll give you, like if you sign up, they'll give you 10% off on your next product. I don't know how effective those things are. I assume that they would be effective. I think that there's a lot of like questions like that need to be answered, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I think waiting until the end, especially in this case, and they're not all like this, like in IKEA, especially in Europe, their circular programs are promoted broadly and pretty vividly. But yeah, I think making that salient earlier on can likely have an increase in uptake.
And I have a couple questions here about what it actually means for these companies to take back the products. So there's I've got one attendee asking, you highlighted the items will be recycled or donated. Are they providing any information about what exactly what that recycling or donation, where that goes? And another, participant asking the same sort of thing, asking, what happens with the products and does that affect participation to your knowledge?
Yeah, so we have one study where we allowed people to choose what happened at the end. So we basically, it was a way to manipulate control. So we just allowed them to choose where it would be. Like the condition was the products, it was with sofas, and the firm had decided that rather than refurbish and resell, that they were going to refurbish and donate. And we gave them the option of where, what company could donate to, what charity could donate to. And by increasing like control in that sense, by getting people more involved in where this would be donated, we increase psychological ownership and control and willingness to pay in those situations. So I think like involving consumers in that decision does increase attachment and willingness to pay. I think that that's a difficult thing to do. But I don't think that consumers do know where like what happens to the product. Firms, we didn't run anything where we communicated what would happen and if there was any difference. I have other projects where we try to value different modes of disposal. So, like reselling versus recycling versus donating versus trashing. And we do find differences in valuation for those things. But that's but that's different than what we're talking about here. So I would be careful to say if there's differences across there.
All right. Based on your model, it seems like the positive control effect would evaporate if the control were removed. Specifically, would you expect consumers to continue to like the circular programs if they were mandatory, for example, governmental instead of optional?
Yeah, so we did run some studies on we ran some studies on how did we manipulate it. So so 35%, so what we did is we manipulated the prevalence of the study. Because one of the big questions is like, okay, so if disposal control becomes less valued because it's available through like a bunch of different products, do people still feel like more attached to it? And so we ran studies where we had the prevalence of these products was higher or lower, and then also if the product was able to be picked up through curbside recycling, because that is like kind of a similar type of, if you increase control by, let's say, having electronics, we ran an electronic study that could be curbside recycled, and the effect almost like disappears if you can dispose of it conveniently, if you don't value the affordance, right? So if you don't get additional control, then it goes away. And so, yeah, so I think like if a government were to mandate that all companies were to do this, then I don't think you'd get the increase in valuation across products.
Interesting.
But then you also wouldn't have the comparison products because they'd all be that high. So you would be paying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So another question, there's a lot of commercial greenwashing going on right now, specifically with regard to responsible disposal and reuse. Do you think providing more specific information might recruit more participation by convincing consumers that the program truly is being environmentally responsible with their products they take back?
Oops, sorry. I don't know what I did there. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big issue. So I've done some expert witness work on greenwashing cases. And I think that, I mean, the one thing that we find in all these cases is that these claims and labels and programs are material to decision making for a lot of consumers, even if it's not for all consumers, but it is for a large group of consumers. So it is super important that the legitimacy of these programs is upheld. And if litigation is the only way to do that, then so be it. But I think that firms, as they move forward and make these claims, they have to be careful because I mean, there is litigation for greenwashing and in these things because it is seen to be material to decision making. I don't know if I really answered the question, but
Well, I think it's at least a start, and it's a whole topic of research that sure you will have more on in the future, and we look forward to hearing more results as you have them. We are at time, so I do need to thank you again, Remy, for giving us this presentation and answering so many questions today. Thank you to the audience for participating and asking your questions and making sure this is an interactive session. Several people asked earlier about if this is being recorded and will be posted, and yes, it will. Again, you can check out bu.edu/IGS/events. Both on there, you'll find links to the previous recordings of events, as well as a whole bunch of upcoming events that we hope we will see you again during. Thanks you all again. Have a good rest of your day.